In this section, we're going to look at how to use CSVs to carry out migrations using Metalogic's Essentials for Office 365. Now, just for context, CSV is known as a comma-separated values file. And in this context, just for simplicity, it's essentially enabling us to use a spreadsheet to assist us with migration. And this will become clearer as we work through some examples. So as I say, the easiest way to explain this is with an example. So what I'm going to do first is a file share migration to Office 365. So on my local disk here, I have a file share called example file share, or a folder called example file share. And within that, I have a folder here called finance. And within that, there are some typical documents that you might have in a team folder. So some general documents and then some documents classified by country. So I want to migrate that data into Office 365 and also add metadata in the process. So to do that using a CSV, it's a similar process to the normal process. So I'm going to right click and copy that folder. I'm going to navigate to the library I want to paste it into. So that sits down here under departments, subsites, finance, and that library there, the documents library. So I'm going to right click there and choose paste. So that initiates the migration wizard, and the target site and list have been selected automatically because we chose them in the navigator. So when I click on next, it's pulled up the content type for the target set to document. I'm going to change that to Meta1 document because that's the one I want to use in this example. And now it's showing me a list of fields that the library is expecting. So we have things like the percentage complete, meta country, department, and status. So even when you're working with a CSV for these examples, if there's one field you know is going to be the same for all documents, you can specify that here and that will appear in our CSV. So what I'm going to do, just to show you how that works, I'm going to choose a meta department as finance. Okay, so then I click next. I'm going to leave the remaining values empty. The non-standard values, because we'll be able to enter data for that in our CSV. I'm going to click next. Now here you see we've got the option down at the bottom here to create a CSV for uploading, tagging, and copying files. So if I select that and now click finish, the wizard won't actually execute a migration. What it will do is it will create a CSV with a list of the files we intend to migrate and the metadata it's expecting at the target in defined columns. So if I save this on my desktop and call it file share migration CSV and click save, that will now, when I click create that CSV. It doesn't take too long to create that, and then once it's created, we will open it and edit it. So okay, that says the export is completed. Now when I click view CSV file, you see as I described, I'm just going to make these columns slightly bigger. So we have a column for the source file, and we have a column for the target site. That's currently blank because during the course of this migration with a CSV file, we can choose a different target site should we wish. We have the target SharePoint list, and then we have the SharePoint file name. Just expand that out. So that's the name of each of the files. Now, as I pan across to the right here, we see we have columns for all the metadata fields that it's expecting at the target. So the content type, percentage complete, meta country, meta department. Now, you note the meta department is already completed as finance because before we generated the CSV, we specified that as a value in the wizard. So as I say, if there's certain columns you know you want to pre-populate with the same field, you can add those values here. So remaining with status, title, created, modified, date, and so on. So from here we can start to complete values in the CSV. So we can add metadata for individual documents if you like on a document by document basis. So I could put in a percentage complete here as 0.1, which will be 10%, 0.2, 20%, 0.3, 30%. And using Excel, I can just fill those out for an example. I'm getting to specify meta country, so I can put Bulgaria. And maybe put that as the first few values. Sorry, I just skipped down there. There we go. So maybe half the documents, and then the remaining maybe France and UK. So specify those out there. And then a status, maybe use the same value for all, so final as the status. So what I've been doing there, apologies, my page down key is right next to my arrows, so I hit that by accident. Okay, so now we have final as the status for all of those documents. So a few other things you can do here, I'll just point out to you. If there are certain things you don't want included in your migration, so perhaps you don't want to include this document there, the BN specification, you can remove it at this stage just by right-clicking and deleting the row, and that will no longer be included in the migration. There's another step later on where you can remove it using a checkbox, but say if you had a long list of 1,000 documents and there were 300 you knew you didn't want to migrate, you can just remove them from here. So from there, I'm just going to save that with my changes. So I need to make sure that's saved as a CSV, comma delimited, and I'll call it file share migration CSV 0.1. Okay, and click save. So from there, I can go back to Essentials and choose the target destination I want these documents to go into. So I'm going to choose this documents library, and then from there I click on File Manager, Upload Content using CSV. So I click on that, and now I need to browse to my CSV. So there it is, CSV 0.1, and you'll see if I just make this bigger, there's the list of files that we've chosen to migrate, and it's not including the one we removed. And then on the right here is all the metadata we specified, which is unique for each document. So it's now, when we complete this wizard, going to take these files from source to target, and it's going to tag them with the metadata from our CSV. So we can choose to take all the documents by clicking check all, or just specify a certain number of them. So maybe if you didn't want to bring maybe one of these documents, you could uncheck and that won't be included in the migration. Under the advanced options, the ones to point you to or draw your attention to here, particularly this one, use created modified properties from the spreadsheet. So if that option is checked, then the created and modified dates that are here will be the ones that are migrated. If you've generated this CSV and you've spent a few days changing the metadata, then it's perhaps wise not to use created and modified from the CSV, because the created modified from the actual documents would be more accurate, more correct. We can choose to overwrite if the file exists, defer required fields, copy permissions as before, and similar to the normal migration, the Azure Turbo Mode options are there, and remapping users. So I'm happy with all of those. I'm going to click Finish. And that's now going to initiate the migration. And as I said before, that's going to migrate the documents from the file share to Office 365 and add the metadata that we've written into our CSV. So I'll just give this a couple of moments to process, and then we'll go and look at the results. So that migration is now complete. It's showing 8 items processed successfully. And if I click on View Log, that will show me the log for the job, and you can see there each of the individual items. Okay, so now if we look at the outcome in the actual library, which is showing here, we see that we've got all the documents migrated, and the metadata we specified for each individual item has also been copied across from our CSV. So we've got 10% in Bulgaria and finance as a department, whereas other documents have slightly different metadata. We can also observe this in the target if I right-click and choose View in the browser. That will navigate me to that library, and if I go to one of these documents, like for example the CV Peter Murphy, just quickly we note that the modified is showing Alan de Jong, because that was who I mapped it to. The modified date is preserved as the 10th of June 2015, not today's date. And if I go down and view the properties or details, we'll see that we have our metadata down here: status published, percentage complete 10, department finance, and meta country Bulgaria. So that's how to leverage a CSV to migrate from file share to Office 365. So next I'm going to show you how to migrate using a CSV from SharePoint to SharePoint. Now this is an option that works specifically for item level migration. So you won't see this function when you are migrating lists or sites. So what I'm going to do I'm going to migrate the documents from one library to another. Now, in this example, I'm going to work within the same tenant, but cross-tenant or on-premises to Office 365 works in the same way. So I'm going to select the documents I've just migrated, right-click and copy those from that library. I'm going to paste them into this library here called confidential documents. I'm going to right-click and choose paste. So that fires up the SharePoint items migration wizard. So there we have the target list and the target URL. Now when I click next, it's showing me the content type at the target and all of the metadata fields. Now, what's interesting in this example is that the content type in the source library and the target library are the same, and the field names are also the same. So it's mapped all fields, not just the standard fields. So you see we've got fields for meta, country, department, status, and so on. So I can change these here, or I can leave it for the CSV. So I'll change one of the fields here. I'll change the status to, let's go for reviewed. So now when I produce a CSV, everything in this status field is going to show reviewed. The others will show the original values. So I click on next and click on create CSV for uploading, tagging and copying files as before, and click finish. That's again going to prompt me to save a CSV. So I'm going to save that on my desktop and call it SharePoint migration CSV. Okay, and click save. So again, now I click create and this wizard kicks off. Now it's not carrying out the migration as before, it's just generating the CSV. So give that a couple of seconds to finish. Okay, so the CSV is now ready. So I click view on CSV file. And again, as before, we see we've got the SharePoint site, the SharePoint source list, the SharePoint source file. The target site is currently still blank because, as before, we can choose a different site when we're using this this CSV. And the remaining fields, again, if I pan a bit to the right, are showing the metadata required at the target. Now, what's interesting in this example, if I just move that back slightly, is that it has the values already pre-populated that it's taken from the source. So as I say, if the content types at the source and target match and the fields at the source and target match, then when it creates this CSV, the original values those files had from the source will appear here. The only difference really is you see the status now is showing as reviewed for all items. That's because I added that as part of the wizard. So from here I can make changes as before. So I could change the meta country here for these items to UK. I could change maybe the meta department to HR for these items here. Let me just drag that down like so. And the status perhaps for some of those I could change to draft. So I'll change these values here to draft. Now I'm going to save my CSV or save my changes again. Make sure that I select CSV. I'm going to call this SharePoint Migration 0.1 CSV and click save. So now I can use this CSV to migrate my data. So I go back to Essentials and choose the target library. Just load that. There's a couple of documents in there already. In fact, I'll just remove these so we've got a clean migration. Okay, so that's now empty, and I'm going to choose confidential documents, upload content using CSV, and now I'm going to browse to the CSV I created for the SharePoint migration. So there it is. Just expand that out. So you see now we've got a list of the documents that we're going to migrate from the source SharePoint site in this instance, and all of the metadata that I've specified in my CSV. So I'm going to click check all. Now I'm going to click check connection because I'm going SharePoint to SharePoint, so the connection is fine. Under the advanced options, the same values as we saw before. A couple of differences you see here. Now, because we're going SharePoint to SharePoint, we can choose whether or not to include versions. Which wasn't an option available when we were doing the CSV from file share. So happy with all of those. We can script or schedule, just hit finish, and that will kick off the migration straight away. Again, I'll just hit details so we can monitor and view each item as it comes across. Okay, so that's now complete. It's showing 8 items processed successfully. If I click on view log, That will show me the log for the items that have been migrated. As before, select all, save as CSV if you want to do some post migration analysis. Now, if we look at the items, so I'll go and right click and tick view in the browser. That will show me the items that have migrated. And if I choose one of these, like for example this Excel document, and look at the properties, we'll see it has the metadata we specified in the spreadsheet. So status is draft, 10% complete, Meta 1 department is HR, and the country is UK. And again, if I choose a different one, like this as PowerPoint, we should see some slightly different metadata. So again, that's loading, and we've got again the fields which we specified in our CSV. So that is how to leverage CSVs to migrate both from file share and from SharePoint to SharePoint.